August 1943 brought the first German prisoners of war to the Norfolk Naval Base in Virginia.
After weeks at sea, they expected barbed wire, armed dogs, and harsh treatment. Instead, they stepped into a world that challenged every belief they carried from Germany. The base sprawled across more than 4,000 acres, a city of cranes, warehouses, and docks stretching into the horizon. In a single day, the port moved on
more cargo than Hamburg, Germany's largest harbor, could handle in an entire week. The prisoners stared at the spectacle in silence. Their officers had told them that America was fractured, poorly organized, incapable of
sustaining a global war. Yet here, cranes worked without pause, loading and unloading ships in numbers that
dwarfed anything the Reich had ever achieved. One former factory worker counted nearly 50 cargo vessels in the harbor. Each was being serviced at once, as if the process were routine. The march from the docks to the waiting trains deepened the shock. Along the route, the prisoners passed vast parking lots filled with civilian automobiles. These did not belong to generals or wealthy elites. They were the cars of dock workers and clerks, ordinary laborers, with a level of private ownership unheard of in Germany. The people's car, promised by the Nazi regime since 1934, remained a propaganda Warfronts. Fewer than 1,000 had ever reached civilians. In America, even those at the bottoms of the wage scale seemed to have cars of their own. It was an early sign that the wealth of this nation was not reserved for a few, but extended across society. Then came the trains. German troops had grown used to traveling in freight wagons, the notorious 40 and 8 cars that crammed men like cargo. What awaited them in Norfolk defied belief. Full passenger coaches stood ready, with padded seats that folded into sleeping berths. Dining cars offered meals with white tablecloths and silver cutlery. Observation cars provided wide glass windows to view the passing landscape. When the guards apologized for the stockyards of Kansas City delivered another blow. Tens of thousands of cattle stood in holding pens, awaiting slaughter. The prisoners smelled the meat-packing plants long before they saw them. German soldiers who had survived on thin rations in Africa watched American workers eat beef sandwiches during their breaks. For them, meat was as
common as bread. When one guard casually bought hamburgers for the prisoners, paying with a single dollar bill,
the shock deepened. What in Germany was a rare feast was here a casual purchase. In the countryside, farms displayed the same power as the factories. Tractors, combines, and trucks filled the fields. A single machine harvested as much in a day as entire villages in Europe managed in weeks. Farmers' sons, sometimes
teenagers, drove equipment worth more than a German family could earn in a lifetime. Everywhere the prisoners looked,
wealth and efficiency seemed limitless. They had been told America was decadent and weak. Instead, they saw a
nation whose industrial and agricultural engines moved with unstoppable force. The effect was not immediate surrender, but disbelief,
turning into resignation. The myths of superiority were dying in the glow of American factories and fields. Life inside the American prison camps dealt the most sustained blows to Nazi ideology. When the first groups
of German prisoners arrived in Texas and Oklahoma in late 1943, they expected harsh treatment, perhaps even
brutality. Instead, they found rows of newly built wooden barracks, each fitted with electric lights, steam heat, flush toilets, and hot showers. To men raised in rural Germany, where entire villages often lacked indoor plumbing, these conditions seemed unimaginable. One officer remarked that the camp buildings contained more lumber than his entire hometown. Far from being starved or neglected, the prisoners encountered a standard of living that exceeded what many of them had known as civilians in their own country.
The camp hospitals reinforced this impression.
Fully equipped with X-ray machines, surgical theaters, and well-stocked pharmacies, they provided medical care that surpassed most German civilian facilities. For the first time, many prisoners encountered penicillin, a drug they had only heard rumored.
American doctors and nurses used it freely, even on minor infections among captives. A German
surgeon, captured in North Africa, later testified that he had seen American medical staff save the lives
of enemy soldiers with equipment and supplies unavailable in the Reich since 1941. To men who had watched comrades die from untreated wounds, the experience was humbling and disorienting. Food was another
demonstration of American resources. Kitchens were outfitted with industrial equipment, walk-in refrigerators, mechanized mixers, and gas ranges capable of feeding thousands at once. Rations included fresh milk, eggs, vegetables, and meat, items
German civilians had not seen in years. Regulations required cooks to prepare more than was needed to ensure no prisoner went hungry. The surplus, untouched and perfectly edible, was routinely thrown away. One former hotel chef from Munich wept as he discarded bread and meat, knowing his family back for home survived on scraps. It was not cruelty but casual abundance that broke his spirit.
Beyond food and shelter, the camps provided something else that prisoners had been told did not exist.
In America, education and culture. Libraries were stocked with German-language books. Universities sent professors to lecture
on subjects ranging from mathematics to political science. Correspondence courses allowed prisoners to study while in
captivity. Camp newspapers, produced by the prisoners themselves, slowly shifted in tone from defiant nationalism to
debates about democracy and economic reform. American films shown in the camp theaters shocked the Germans. They saw movies depicting hardship, corruption, and even government failures. What astonished them was not the content but the openness. In Germany, such self-criticism would mean imprisonment. In America, it was normal entertainment. The cumulative effect of these experiences was psychological erosion. Prisoners who entered camps still loyal to Hitler and
the Reich found themselves doubting. Their captors not only led and housed them better than their own army
had, but also treated them with a dignity that clashed with Nazi racial doctrine. Every flush toilet, every
electric light, every medical treatment chipped away at propaganda. By 1944, many German soldiers no longer spoke of
victory. They spoke instead of what they had seen, of a nation whose wealth and humanity
made the Reich appear impoverished and cruel.
By late 1943, the cracks in Nazi ideology among prisoners of war were widening. What began as disbelief
turned into reluctant recognition that much of what they had been taught was false. The turning point
came when Italian soldiers, captured earlier as allies, began working freely alongside Americans after Italy's surrender. They received better quarters, more pay, and greater freedom of movement. German prisoners watched in silence. They had
treated Italians with contempt during the alliance, yet the Americans treated them with dignity. For many, it
was the first undeniable proof that democracy did not mean weakness. The Christmas season deepened the impact. Across the United States, churches, civic groups, and ordinary families sent gifts to the camps. Hundreds of thousands of packages arrived, filled with cigarettes, candy, toiletries, and games. Choirs performed carols in German. Children sent handmade cards. In Texas, women baked cakes and cookies for men who had been
trying to kill their own sons months before. The generosity shattered Nazi racial propaganda more effectively than saying. Prisoners who had lost relatives in Allied bombing raids admitted they could not reconcile such
kindness with the image of Americans as mongrels and enemies of civilization. One officer wrote in his diary, They know we are their enemies, yet they treat us with compassion. What kind of power allows such mercy? By 1944, the re-education programs were underway. The U.S. Army's Special Projects Division oversaw classes on democracy, economics, and history. More than 40,000 prisoners enrolled. Camp newspapers began publishing and
essays questioning Nazi policy and praising democratic ideals. Prisoners read American newspapers, shocked at the range of opinions.
tolerated in print. For men accustomed to a state press, the idea of open debate was revolutionary. We need to think about a new future. Growing number began to speak openly of rebuilding Germany, not in the image of Hitler, but in the model of the United States. Meanwhile, work assignments exposed them to America's productive strength. In fields and factories,
Prisoners saw women and minorities operating heavy machinery, running production lines, and managing equipment. What Nazi ideology had proved
dismissed as impossible, was happening every day in front of them. At shipyards, they saw hundreds of
landing craft being assembled monthly. In steel mills, furnaces produced more output in a week than
German plants managed in months. Agricultural assignments reinforced the lesson. Combines and tractors produced harvests that were dwarfed Europe's. Farmers discarded fruit for minor blemishes, a sight so shocking that some prisoners broke down in despair. For them, the waste was proof of infinite resources. By 1945, the transformation was unmistakable.
Surveys conducted by American intelligence revealed that the majority of German prisoners no longer believed in the inevitability
of Nazi victory. Many spoke instead of their plans for life after the war. Officers discussed adopting
American methods of agriculture and industry in a future Germany. Some openly expressed admiration for democratic freedoms. When news of the Normandy invasion reached the camps, the psychological collapse was complete. Prisoners saw newsreels of thousands of ships, aircraft, and men overwhelming France in days. It confirmed what they already knew.
from daily experience. Germany could not compete. When repatriation came after the war, the men returned to a
Devastated homeland. Yet they carried back more than memories of defeat. They had witnessed another way of life, prosperity, through democracy, power through production, strength through diversity. Many would later help rebuild West Germany, bringing with them
lessons learned, not on the battlefield, but in captivity. They returned to Germany, not as the soldiers who
had surrendered, but as men who had witnessed another world. Captivity had dismantled propaganda and replaced it with